colleagues and dear participants. A very warm and cordial welcome to all of you to today's webinar on Comparative World Literatures organized by Hindi University, West Bengal. This significant program is being conducted under the esteemed patronage of the Honorable Vice-Chancellor, Professor Nandini SAHU ma'am, whose leadership has consistently encouraged interdisciplinary engagement and global perspectives in literary studies. We are also privileged to have with us our distinguished speakers, Dr. Shantanu Majisau and Dr. Chandramalli SENGUPTA ma'am, whose scholarships promises to deepen our engagement with comparative world literatures and enrich today's deliberations. It is now my privilege to introduce the Honorable Vice-Chancellor ma'am, Professor Nandini SAHU, who is an eminent academician, Amazon best-selling author, and a distinguished voice in Indian English literature. A former director of the School of Foreign Languages at IGNOU, New Delhi. She is a celebrated poet, creative writer, and folklorist with 23 authored and edited books to her credit. A double gold medalist in graduation and post-graduation, she has been honored with the gold medal by the Honorable Vice President of India for her contribution to English studies, along with several prestigious recognitions, including Michael Madhusudan Academy Award in the year 2024, Lifetime Achievement Award in 2024, Tagore Samman 2025, Honorary Fellowship 2025, and the Ambassador of Eternity Award 2026 by the International Academy of Ethics, India. Her wide-ranging research interests span new literatures, critical theory, folklore, and cultural studies, Indian knowledge systems, comparative world literatures, and beyond. We are deeply honored to have your gracious presence, ma'am. I now request the Honorable Vice-Chancellor, Professor Nandini SAHU ma'am, to kindly deliver the inaugural address. Ma'am, please.
Thank you, Dr. Paramita. And a very good morning, namaskar, to both the speakers and the participants. I'm very glad to invite two speakers to Comparative World Literatures Lecture Series from Hindi University, West Bengal. The speakers are Dr. Shantanu Majee and the other speaker is Dr. Chandramalli SENGUPTA, both of whom I have been acquainted through social media and a little bit of their work. I have seen some of their work. Once we invited them, I had a look at the kind of research both of them have been doing. And I am sure and I hope that today the intervention of both the speakers will enrich the lecture series from Hindi University on comparative world literatures. In the beginning itself, I told both the speakers that we introduced this lecture series last year in 2025 in the month of February, and since then there has been no looking back. The best brains in the country, serious researchers, academicians, even doctors, and many people from different walks of life, like interdisciplinary subjects, interdisciplinary fields, folklorists, even people from social media and films and journalism, Patrakarita. We had one lecture yesterday on Hindi Patrakarita. That is already on our website, on our YouTube. So we have been truly interdisciplinary. We have been inviting all the serious academicians and researchers to contribute to this lecture series, and undoubtedly it has created ripples in Indian academia. People have been watching this lecture series carefully. People have been sharing. If you go to our YouTube channel, you will see that maximum number of sharing has been happening of late of our lecture, YouTube videos and the lectures. Students are hugely benefited. I receive compliments and comments and emails from students across the states in the country and otherwise that they are hugely benefited by our lecture series. With this in my mind, when I invited the two of you, I requested Dr. Paramita to talk to the two of you. I had a look at the kind of research that you are doing, and one of you, Dr. Shantanu, is going to speak from colony to classroom, English studies in India. Yes, it's a very, very important subject. We are thinking about decolonizing our English departments, but is it possible really to decolonize at this point of time? And in case we really plan to decolonize, how do we go about it? What are the new pedagogies? What are the new subjects or platforms or engagements that we should bring into our classrooms in English studies? Maybe one of our discussions with you today, I would be in a better position to talk to you or maybe put a few questions or give a few critical comments after you have spoken, since I haven't gone through your research. But yes, we are eagerly looking forward to listen to your research because this is a very, very important subject. In the post-colonial era, and the postmodern area time, which we somehow say that postmodernism. In one of the seminars, somebody presented a paper on postmodernism, and it was really interesting. Postmodernism and how postmodernism, where in one case, the researcher, the speaker, and the writer is attached to the readers and to the researchers, and in another case, the writer stands alone in the postmodern. So this is more associated with digital humanities and post-truth. So these kind of complex things are getting into English departments, and people have been discussing English departments that we are interdisciplinary, we are getting into all the subjects, all the disciplines like social sciences, medical humanities, blue humanities, ocean humanities, and green studies, ecocriticisim. So many new things are coming up. So in such a scenario, how do and where do we stand in the English departments vis-a-vis comparative world literatures? And I hope that you will touch upon translation here and there so that our participants will know what kind of texts, when they are translated, can get into the pedagogy of comparative world literature. This is not just comparative literature, this is comparative world literatures. So these are the points and questions and debates that personally, as a teacher of English, I would expect you to be discussing with us. Of course, it's flexible. We keep it open for you to talk about your research and your engagements. And the next speaker, Dr. Chandramalli Sengupta, would be speaking about female priests, a comparative study of two novels of Africa and India. This topic resonates with, of course, my area of research, being a woman, and also I have been writing on gender studies, on feminism, on queer studies, on masculinity studies. I have books and books on these subjects. So I am very, very eagerly waiting and looking forward to listen to Dr. Chandramalli when she is going to talk about female priests. On female priests, I have never spoken, never written. So I think your research and your lecture is going to open up a new window for me personally as a teacher of English and a person of gender studies. And also it's going to give new ideas to my colleagues and my students. We are more than happy to welcome both of you to the Comparative World Literatures Lecture Series from Hindi University. Now it's open for both of you, but before that, please allow Dr. Paramita to give a formal introduction to about the two of you. And many thanks to Dr. Paramita and Aman Singh for seamlessly conducting this program. Thank you, Paramita. Thank you, Aman.
Thank you, ma'am, for your inspiring inaugural address. Now, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our first speaker of the day, Dr. Shantanu Majee. Dr. Majee is an associate professor in the Department of English at TECHNO, India University, West Bengal. He completed his MPhil and PhD in 19th century studies from Jadavpur University, Kolkata, West Bengal. His scholarship is deeply rooted in Victorian studies, and he has contributed extensively to internationally reputed publications such as the Palgrave Encyclopedia of Victorian Women's Writing, Journal of Victorian Culture, Essays and Studies, and the Australian Journal of Victorian Studies. Beyond his work in literary studies, Dr. Majee has also engaged meaningfully with digital humanities. He served as a project fellow in a significant collaborative initiative between the School of Cultural Texts and Records, Jadavpur University, and the British Library UK, focusing on the digitization of South Asian archival resources. He was awarded the Art Varta Publishing Grant in 2021 to curate a virtual exhibition titled Song of the River, Curating Music, Memory and Modernity, and has recently received support from the India Foundation for the Arts under its Arts Education Program for 2025-2026. Dr. Majee's ongoing academic engagements include contributions to the Undisciplining the Victorian Classroom Initiative and the One More Voice project, where he works on BIPOC voices in Victorian periodical press. He is currently editing a forthcoming Routledge volume titled Traveling Texts, translating 19th century European classics into Indian vernacular languages, which explores translation, colonial modernity, and the complexities of transcultural identity. He has also contributed to the NPTEL Swayam MOOC on modern Indian writing in English translation, offering critical insights into India's literary modernity and translation practices. With this brief introduction, I now invite Dr. Shantanu Majee to deliver his lecture. So over to you.
Thank you so much. Am I audible to all of you? Yes. Yes. Thank you so much for that generous praise. I hope I am able to prove myself worthy of such adulation. May I know how much time would I have for my deliberation so that I could arrange my speech accordingly?
Yes, so it's almost 30 minutes.
Okay. So, Paromita has been very generous to talk about undisciplining the Victorian Classroom Initiative, of which I tend to talk about today. But before I may start engaging with my own project, I think it is important for us here to try and address the idea of world literatures and comparativism. I am grateful to Dr. Sahu and her team to try and bring the idea of comparative world literatures into the academic discourse of our city with a renewed spirit, because the idea of world literature, as we know of, is one of the most significant intellectual frameworks we can think of how literature is read, taught, and circulated among our classrooms. So when we use the term world literature, and this is also an introduction to my project, of which I will definitely, discuss in a moment's time from now, by using the term world literature, we are not merely referring to, collection of cultural masterpieces from different nations of the world, but it is also about how texts migrate beyond their original linguistic and geographical boundaries through the act of translation, adaptation, reception, and reinterpretation. We all know about Goethe, who first imagined this concept of world literature as a cosmopolitan exchange among nations of the world. Beginning from him to contemporary theorists such as David Damrow, Franco Moretti, this field has evolved into a critical inquiry that tends to acquire newer meanings in contemporary contexts of literary studies. My colleague Debaruti and I were very fortunate to sit in for a course offered by David Damrow's student and colleague, Dr. Martin Puchner at Harvard University, where Martin very involvedly talked about that eventful evening when Goethe was reading a Chinese novel and broke into an exchange with his dear poet Eckermann. And from that dialogue, the idea of the world literature seemed to come into existence. So, at its core, this idea of world literature challenges the older assumption that we usually try to ascribe with literary value of texts. And it insists that, our idea of what we tend to think as literary modernity is always interconnected with texts that come from Asia, Africa, Latin America, and other historically marginalized regions, if not peripheral supplements to the Western canon for sure. So when we tend to, move away from our canonical study of literature to this framework of world literature, we are basically aligning ourselves productively with a broader history and context of English studies. In my dissemination today, I will definitely talk about how traditionally English studies developed around the teaching of English language and literature, and especially inclusively connecting itself to the canonical works of Britain and later the Anglophone world. But I believe if we are ready to look at English literature through the lens of world literature, we are also ready to accept that this discipline has never remained static, which is why world literature, I believe, expands the discourse of English studies by situating English language texts within a larger, wider global systems of exchange. So, when we talk about, let's say, canonical Victorian fiction, it enables a student perhaps to read canonical Victorian fiction alongside, let's say, Bengali reformist prose written around the same time, or perhaps engaging with romantic poetry through its translations in Indian bhasha literatures, or looking at contemporary British novels comparatively with African and Caribbean rewritings, right? These are exercises that we tend to encourage in our classrooms, and such an approach, I believe, reveals the fact that English literature, as we tend to see it, itself was shaped by empire, by trade, by missionary networks, by this entire idea of colonial education, and above all, its encounters with non European cultures. So, for institutions in the global south, for institutions like yours and mine, aligning English studies with world literature is not only meaningful, but a responsible act on our own accord. I believe it allows the discipline to move beyond our inherited colonial syllabi toward a more dialogic curriculum, where English texts written in the English language, are to be read alongside with Indian, Asian, and other global traditions, which comparatively enables us to question the hierarchy, the privilege of which these texts have boasted itself for centuries now. At the same time, our engagement with world literature also allows us to recover local histories of reading, of translation, regional pedagogies, and provincial criticism that have long contributed to the making of literary modernity. So rather than renewing itself, world literature does not replace English studies, it only contributes and enlarges it. And if we are acquainted to approach this new study of English, not from the guardianship of a colonial canon, but branching out into a more exclusive framework where you have more participation from multilingual, transnational, and comparative conversations about how literature travels and how these travel routes matters to our world. I believe we will be able to orient ourselves and the discourse of English studies towards a path which is more inclusive, which is more historically aware, and intellectually relevant to the needs and requirements of the contemporary times. Um, with this introductory premise, I would like to move on to discuss about my own project with Undisciplining the Victorian Classroom initiative, which tends to locate itself right in this cultural milieu in branching out the reception studies of English literature in a context which is so familiar to you and me, and in doing so, unravels deeper frameworks of a very layered understanding of English studies in Bengal. Please allow me to share my PPT, and my presentation today is called From Colony to Classroom, English Studies in India. So, I believe you're able to visualize the second page of my presentation. Yes, I believe so, right? Yes. Thank you, Paramita. Thank you, Shanmati. So, the idea here is to try and look at the project which I intend to present to you in today's lecture. But it is also to engage with two very important pedagogical frameworks which seem to have made a mark for itself in our own understanding of comparative world literatures today. So when I talk about my project, I definitely talk about a reading of how the Victorian Studies Research Group in the Department of English at Jadavpur University, which is my alma mater, seem to contribute in shaping our contextual understanding of English studies in the cultural milieu of upper class, privileged Hindu Bengali community. But in doing so, my intention is also to try and open up a larger model of studying English canons in more meaningful provincial approaches to it, so that we could all try and engage in this exercise on our own accord to unravel our own literary histories and come to this understanding of what we tend to term as English literature at the level of meaning making, at the level of formation of literary values, is actually intercepted and travels through our own contextual understanding of local cultural systems. So it gives me great pride to begin by referring to this essay, which is so close to my heart. This essay, a revolutionary essay, I must say, which was published during the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. And this essay was published in the Indiana University Press Bulletin and called itself Undisciplining Victorian Studies. So this is the research work of three Asian women, now teaching in European and American universities, called Ranjani Chatterjee, Alicia Christoph, and Amy Wong, who went on to think carefully on how we develop a relational mode of thinking when we tend to engage with scholarships across different fields and disciplines. Ranjani, Alicia, and Amy, all of them who teach English studies in the West, looked into Victorian studies and tend to look at minor characters from canonical Victorian texts. And in unraveling the history of these minor characters to the rereading of the text, they did not only went on to investigate the idea of looking through the text from a different end, so as to say, but in doing so was able to generate an alternative discourse, I would say different narrative, through which the entire plot of a canonical novel could be undone, so as to say. With this, of course, I also keep in mind works of other colleagues in the field, namely Shukonna Banerjee, who teaches in UCLA now, and Ryan Fong, who also made a similar claim in a special issue of Victorian Literature and Culture in 2021, where they seem to develop this idea of undisciplining, this very important pedagogical framework of undisciplining, as an intrinsically relational model of decolonization, which could then be applied in the academic domain of 19th century studies. So what do I intend to mean by using this word undisciplining? Undisciplining is nothing more than an assimilationist way of thinking, where you don't make your meaning of text out of the differences that characterized your culture with a colonizer's culture, but you tend to assimilate the difference and insist to read the difference that structures your social positioning as a reader, right? Along with this idea of undisciplining, I believe one other structure that I would really like to talk about is this idea of trans-imperialism, which has been reread and revolutionized by Shukonna Banerjee in the last few years, where she looks at the possibility of reading comparatively, let's say 19th century English literature and 19th century Bengali literature, not only in terms of parallels or similarities, but opening up both these literatures written out of different cultural milieu, but at the same time operating along an interrelated plane of modernity. So let's say when we are reading Walter Scott and we are reading Bankim Chandra, when we are reading, let's say, Dickens and we are reading Sharat Chandra, we don't tend to engage in a literary analysis of these texts on the basis of their socio-cultural background, but we tend to look at them as texts which are speaking, which are in constant dialogue with the time and the geographies in which they have been produced. Now, in undisciplining these readings, in trying to open themselves up to a more trans-imperial approach, so as to say, what happens is you tend to offer a more liberal notion of these texts, where when you are exposing these texts to interrelated plane of modernity, you are possibly connecting across several imperial and colonial constituencies which continue to shape our societies till this day. around the globe until the present. And in doing so, you are also liberating these texts from an Eurocentric understanding of their value. You are enabling them to be read within the context of a time and space which has given birth to it. So, this is my brief introduction to the notions of decolonizing or undisciplining, rather, as well as the notion of trans imperialism, which I believe are two significant contributions that has happened in the last few years to the idea of the Victorian pedagogical framework. You know, as academicians, we do not tend to talk of pedagogy as much as we are more prone to discuss in our class about literary analysis and reading of the text. But it is our pedagogical approaches that determines what do we read and how do we read. I believe that the notions of undisciplining and trans imperialism are significant breakthroughs in the pedagogical frameworks of academic discourse across the globe because they tend to make us realize where do we belong. And in doing so, they open up a vista of value making, of meaning and interpretation, which were always there with us, but we had been indifferent and unaware of its presence. So, quickly then, let me give you a very, very curated walkthrough across the course that I was able to design for the undisciplining Victorian classroom. Uh, uh, Undisciplining the Victorian classroom, of course, is a international initiative, a conglomeration, if I may say so, of global scholars working in 19th century studies. And in response to Ronjoni, Amy, and Alicia's call, we tend to, work ourselves up in framing this theme, where from our own cultural marginalities, we wanted to read at our own literary past. And in doing so, we were trying to understand the history of English studies from our own cultural milieu. Of course, this is, a work that has possibly been germinated in the history of our nation building too. I mean, if you look at, works that has existed in the last few decades, maybe Gauri Vishwanathan's, monograph, Mask of Context, or C.D. Narasimha, or Sushi Tharu's edited collection, where she looks at how to teach literature in the liberal decade of the 90s. There has been much written about how we study and teach English literature, and in extension the English language in India. But I believe there was a significant gap about discussions which tend to highlight it, how English literary studies in Indian higher education institutions were taken up, not only from the point of our independent nation, but much, much before that, because that has always remained an underrepresented topic in academic teaching and scholarship across the global Anglophone world. The point that I'm trying to, harp at and bring home is the fact that often when we disseminate English cultural texts in our classrooms, we forget to acknowledge that the English syllabuses which tend to exist in our nation did not necessarily were created out of colleges and universities, because for the first time in the history of academia, when a syllabus, a curriculum of English studies was being framed, it was being framed in the dissenting academics. And what we tend to understand as a curriculum of English literature did not exist before the 19th century. It did not originate in colleges and universities, but it came to place as a colonial process. It was drafted for training officers at Victorian police training schools. If you look at the history of institutions like Woolwich and Sandhurst between 1840 and 1902, you will see that uh, the English East India Company is trying to possibly come up with a makeshift body of canonical texts, which will be able to give this, young men who are entering into the army and the cadet services a certain sense of British culture. And this idea of essential British culture then went on to influence generations of English literature curriculum and pedagogical frameworks, which is not much discussed in the Academy of English departments across the universities and colleges of our nation. So, working upon this critical function of locating where do you study your literature from and how do you study your literature from, can actually revolutionize your reading of what literature you study, right? So, this is the milieu. This is the intellectual, disposition from where we started to work on undisciplining the Victorian classroom. And that brought us to this course, a course that I designed for the UVC initiative, which looks at the case study of the 19th century group working at my alma mater, Department of English, Jadavpur University, since its inception in 1956. And while conducting, my extensive research, I was able to unravel this, you know, gang of scholars at the department who have been successful not only establishing alternative circuits of knowledge from their own positionality as academicians of humanities in a city which once used to be the capital of the colonial empire, and then later on was tagged as the cultural capital of the nation. And from their own positionality, how they were able to integrate into their research not only their training in Oxford and Cambridge, but the confluence of South Asia's political and literary cultures at the height of imperialism. So whether it was Professor Malini Bhattacharya's research on the interface of Bengali and English literature of the 19th and 20th centuries, or Yashodhara Bhagchi's rereading of Matthew Arnold, Alfred Tennyson, and Walter Pater from the perspective of a humanities scholar situated in a very privileged position of middle class background in middle 20th century Kolkata, or Sajni Mukherjee's thesis on Charles Dickens, Sheila Lahiri Chaudhury's analysis between John Ruskin and Mahatma Gandhi. All these research that has been carried out by the very, very prolific 19th century research group in Jadavpur University across the first 50 years of its conception from the 1950s, let's say, to the 2000s, had been lying dormant in the department's archive, waiting to be revived in the light of a contemporary discourse like this. And when I started, looking back into their research, trying to engage with the departmental records, their papers, which were archived in the department itself, it seems that, a new world of discourse, a new approach towards pedagogical thinking, which had already been practiced, across the length and breadth of our developing nation, but not has been discussed or brought into the limelight, so as to say, in order to understand that how, when you tend to shift your cultural reading of British canonical texts, without devaluing the knowledge systems historically, but being aware of your own positionality as a colonial subject, you tend to transfer this onus of guilt, this onus of shame that we always, are inflicted with. We always are under the burden of it when we tend to think of ourselves as subjects who constantly aspire to acquire proficiency in English. It's not only about a language which has a certain currency across the global systems, but it is also about our own guilt of trying to cope up with that colonial past. So, quickly speaking, this is the larger uh, breakup of my course, which was designed as a 15-week course, ideally set for a 6 credit system. And whereas the first few modules, so as to say, they look in at the discipline of English studies and how it has grown out of institutional spaces in Victorian England. From the third and the fourth module, the discourse is shifted out of the British Islands and looks at the larger colonial rule of Great Britain. And from this point onwards, the historiography of the course undergoes a change in focus and the context becomes more specialized. Now, I think one important point that I would like to make in this regard before I, move away to my final conclusion is the fact that how important it is for us to re-examine the history of our own English literary studies at our specific institutional context. Because when we do that at a micro level, it allows us to assimilate our history into our reading of the canonical literatures. And this is what, the girls' gang at the West has been talking about. This is what Shukonna, extrapolates when she engages with the term trans-imperial, because we are trying to create an analytical framework where we can try to be successful in placing all that is non-West in a relation of contiguity and continuity with the past empire, which is still out there. And in doing so, not only does this course seeks to relocate, the history of discipline in a new light from broader origins to a more specific micro-level institutional context, but I think it also proposes, and this is in response to, Dr. Sahu's query, a tentative model to decolonize the history of English studies in our nation as it's accepted in the West, by trying to think outside the Anglo-American institutional context and give yourself a alignment to the idea, to the project of comparative world literature. So I'm moving on to my conclusion. And Paramita, I believe I have just a few minutes for my conclusion. Do I have a few minutes for my conclusion, Paramita?
So 2 minutes you have to.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So this idea of comparative world literature, which we had been discussing as an evolving field of inquiry, is at the heart of my project, where we tend to look at literary histories as relational entities. This program that I had taken up places a very specific discipline of Victorian studies in dialogue with the history of a South Asian academic tradition. But rather than looking at this content, this knowledge content, as an export from the Great Britain, this program demonstrates how Indian scholars have actively interpreted, revised, and transformed the meanings of these texts in their local positionalities and in their local engagements with terms like gender, caste, nationalism, language, and above all, modernity. So this move exemplifies a very, very core comparative principle where these texts acquire a new significance. It also, I believe, at one point resonates strongly with the claim that comparative world literature models have been making across the globe, that is the turn towards planetary reading, where literary cultures are examined through the circuits of translation, through the circuits of trans-imperial content, right? Another significant alignment, which I believe emerges from this particular approach, is that you are looking at text from a multilingual perspective. You are reading these texts from a vernacular context. So, when you invoke names such as Rashu Sundari Devi or Fakir Mohan Senapati alongside Jane Austen, alongside, Fyodor Dostoevsky, you are imagining a comparative canon where you have the Indian, you have the European, and all other literary traditions coexisting on equal analytical terms. So, proposing such a methodology might be one of the preliminary steps towards, decolonial practices in relation to plurality and in relations to institutions looking back at their own institutional histories. It might be a way to ask how literary disciplines were formed through our own colonial past, how we and our predecessors has been functional in transforming this history, and how as interlocutors ourselves we are reimagining this collaborative global scholarship in our own times. So this, I believe, is an approach which would allow us to think across borders and beyond the empire. Thank you so much for being such a patient audience today.
Thank you, sir, for your insightful and such an engaging talk. Now, I'm delighted to introduce our second speaker of the day, Dr. Chandramalli Sengupta. Dr. Sengupta is an associate professor in the postgraduate department of Bengali at ASHUTOSH College, Kolkata, West Bengal, and serves as joint secretary of the Academy of Folklore as well as coordinator of its folklore diploma course. She completed her PhD on mythology and Bengali literature as a UGC research fellow and has also received training under the UGC initiative on capacity building for women managers in higher education. An accomplished academic, she has been associated with several premier institutions across West Bengal and India as a guest faculty and resource person, and has supervised doctoral, postdoctoral, and numerous diploma-level research works. Her research spans mythology, folklore, drama, Tagore studies, comparative literature, women's studies, and interdisciplinary domains including film, sociology, and history. She has authored and edited 10 books and published over 70 research papers and multiple book chapters, while delivering more than 60 lectures at national and international forums. Some of her notable works include Myth Puraner Bhangagora, Chitrakalper Sandhane Satyajiter Chalachitra, and Vichitra Binnashe Banglar Lokonatya. I now invite Dr. Chandramalli Sengupta ma'am to begin her lecture. The floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paramita Das. At the very onset, I would again like to express my thanks and gratitude to the Hindi University for inviting me to this wonderful series of lectures. After a very macro level theoretical discussion of my dear friend Shantanu, Mine actually will be a micro study where I would like to show how world literature can be read parallelly and how you can draw comparisons between texts of completely different contexts. As you know that the name of my paper is Female Priests, a comparative study of two novels of Africa and India. So I will think that it is most normal that I would begin by explaining or begin by giving an idea about what a female priest is all about. Technically, a priestess is a word which is the feminine or the female of the word priest. But when we talk about or the folklore aspect or an anthropological aspect, the word priestess has a different connotation which needs to be established at the very beginning. Priestess are those women who are found in mostly ancient polytheistic religion, like those which are found in Greece, in Egypt, in Rome, and later on in the Wiccan community, where these women were considered embodiment of divine feminine energy. Vis-a-vis, when we talk about a woman priest, we find that in the Catholic Orthodox system, these are reserved for men, and in very few cases, we find women who are being given the charge or given the position, and they are called female priests. As you all know, that even in Bengal now, we have Mohila Purohit who are more becoming more and more popular for giving marriages in the Vedic system or in the Vedic way of marriage. So there is a distinction between the priestess and a woman priest, but I have deliberately named my paper as the female priests because saying a priestess will not actually stress upon the gender factor, which is very important in the deliberation that I'm going to make. So what is a female priest? A female priest is defined as a woman acting as a mediator between humanity and the divine. She is authorized to perform sacred rites and religious duties, offer sacrifices, lead worship, conduct marriages, and teach doctrines. She is imagined as a character with magical abilities or divine connections. Now, in this deliberation, I'm going to talk about three such characters, two from the 1952 Bengali novel Nagini Konnar Kahini by Tara Shankar. I'm sure most of you have read this book or are aware of this book. And then I will move on to an English text written by Captain R.S. Rattray, which is titled The Leopard Priestess and was published in 1934. Though written in English, the entire context or the background of this particular novel is set in Africa. Both the novels are quite large in size, so therefore I'll be picking out only those contexts where the priestess herself comes into conflict with the society or with the existing norms, and that is how I'm going to prove what I'm trying to say. I begin with Shankar's Nagini Konnar Kahini, which is based on the folk myth of Monasha and Chand Saudagar. At the very onset, I would like to say that the female characters or the female priests who are shown in this novel are called Deyashini, which actually is a derivation of the word Debangshini, which means a woman who is having godly attributes. So in Tara Shankar's novel, which is based on the folk myth of Monasha and Chand Saudagar, the original myth has the fight between the Shiv worshipper Chandradhar and Shiv's daughter Monasha, whom Chandradhar detested. In his fiction, Tara Shankar created a tribe called the Bishbede, that is the snake charmers of the Poison clan residing in Hijolbil near Sundarbans. In their clan, the fight was between the chief of the clan, who is called a Shirobede, and Shirobedes are often named as Shankar, Mahadev, Shambhu, Vishwambhar, which are all synonyms of Shiv, who would be in constant conflict with the female priestess who is known as the Nagini Konna, and she is considered to be the daughter of the Kal Nagini who had killed Lokhindor in the night of his wedding at the order of Devi Monasha. You can understand that in the folk myth, the tussle was between the father cult representing Shiva and the mother cult representing Monasha. But in Tara Shankar's story, it is a fight for power inside the clan of the Bishbede because both the Shirobede and Nagini Konna were worshippers of Monasha. And in this power struggle, the female priest always had an advantage over the male Shirobede because she had godly powers from Monosha, and she had control over the traditional poison container called the Bish Chungi and the poison needle or the Bish Kata. And also she shared the decision making power that Shirobede, though head of the clan, couldn't take any individual decision. But the Shirobede's control used to be extended to monitor the private life of the Deashini, which was mostly making the clan believe that since the Deashini or the Nagini Konna is connected with the goddess, so she's not allowed to have any relationship with a mortal being as per the rule of the clan. And in order to prove the point, the Shirobedis again used to apply or used to implement another myth of the original Kalnagini. This Kalnagini who killed Lokhinder was cursed by Behula that Kalnaginis will never have a partner because she had killed Behula's husband and made her single. It was believed that because of that curse, the Kalnaginis had only females in their species, no Kalnags or the males. So by that logic, no Nagini Konna can also get a partner as she is the generational daughter of the Adi Kalnagini. Thus, the main conflict between Ashirobede and the Nagini Konna used to escalate when the Nagini Konna looked for or got involved with a mortal male partner. And sometimes these fights turned so ugly that both the Nagini Konna and the Shirobede would plot to kill one another. Here comes the first Deashini of Nagini Konna's Kahini, the first Nagini Konna, that is Shobola, who had fallen in love with a local boy. This boy was murdered and was proclaimed by the then Shirobede Mahadev that he had been punished by goddess Monosha for, within quotations, polluting her devotee Nagini Konna. A white king cobra was found near the body of the deceased boy, which stood in support of the claim made by Shirobede. But Shobola looked through the trick. She understood that no, the guy was murdered and the white snake was put later on by the Shirobede in order to prove it was a divine wrath. So in a fit of rage, she decided to take revenge. And one night, she crawled naked like a snake and reached Mahadev's heart to kill him to set scores even. Yes, she succeeded. But then, in the morning, in order to escape the wrath of the clan, she jumped into the river and vanished. The position of the Nagini Konna is so important in the Vishbede clan that not for a single day the position can remain vacant. So the very next Nagini Konna was put into power, was put into place, and she was Pingola, who was even more fierce than Shobola. As the story moves on, we find that as part of their profession, Pingola visited a zamindar house with her entire team to catch the snakes and to protect the family from snake bites. But that is where she faced an accusation of falsehood by a person called Nagu Thakur, who was a high caste, very handsome, and extremely well-known snake doctor or an Ojha, who alleged that the Bedes had brought the snakes hidden in their clothes only to extract money by falsehood. Refuting that claim, Pingola, in a flash, takes off her sari, undresses in front of the public eyes to prove that the Bedes never lie about snakes, because for them, the snakes are the sacred children of goddess Monosha. Tarashankar is describing Pingola as a hooded snake. Her stark naked body stood up like a hooded snake, thus quashing all allegations and thereby saving the honor of her clan. Now we know that in Chand Saudagar, the mythic story, the Bedes could not save Lokhinder. As a result, Chand called them traitors, cursed them, and banished them from Champak Nagar, because of which all the Bedes had become nomads, including the Vishbede clan of this story. This scene was a terrible blemish that the Vedas carried for generations. But the incident which I just mentioned, Pingala's courage and protest finally erased that age-old shame of the Vedas, and this eventually enhanced her power and position in the clan. We were talking about the gender factor. Nandini ma'am was talking about the gender factor. What followed had a twofold effect: this increasing power of Pingala in the Vishvede clan. One, Shirubede Gangaram's jealousy at Pingala's increasing influence over the clan, and two, which was very strange, Nagu Thakur's transformation from hatred to obsession about Pingala, and vice versa. Both of them had fallen in head over heels in love with each other. This second situation, that Nagu and Pingala being attracted to each other so very much, gave Gangaram a golden opportunity to take out his displeasure and thus dethrone Pingala. Here again, Tarashankar uses another myth which involves Lord Krishna and Kalionag's daughter. The story goes like this: that Krishna, after killing Kalionag's daughter, Kalionag, had promised his daughter that he will return and marry her. The lone snake princess used to deck up with plumeria flowers and waited near the Jamuna river, but Krishna never came back. So naturally, when she was being taunted by her friends, her Sakhis, she cursed them by saying that whenever a snake woman, that is a Nagini Konna, will feel erotic, her body will emit scent of plumeria to bring disgrace. This myth transcended down through generations of Vedas and was widely believed even by the Vishvede clan of the Nagini Konna Kahini story. Now, since Pingala is also a Nagkonna, cunning Gangaram decided to use this myth as a weapon. He brought some cheap plumeria attar from the nearby market and sprinkled it upon sleeping Pingala, so that when she wakes up, she will be disgraced in public because she'll be actually smelling of plumeria flower. She'll be actually smelling of plumeria. People will think that she has become erotic. It doesn't go with her status or her picture of a Nagini Konna. His plot succeeded. Disgraced Pingala, out of sheer shame, kills herself so that her sin doesn't bring divine wrath upon our clan. Hearing the death of Pingala, Nagu turned eccentric, and their love story ends in a horrific tragedy simply as a result of the sheer power game. There are other parts of the story about which I'll come just at the last part of my talk. Next, we look into the 1934 story, The Leopard Priestess, which was written by Captain Robert Sutherland Rattray, who was an anthropologist. He had joined the British Colonial Civil Service in 1907 and spent over 25 years in Gold Coast of Africa in Ghana, gathering field data for his scholarly publications on Ashanti law, religion, art, and of course, Ashanti folklore. These books are well available even now. But this novel is set in pre-colonial Ashanti land, which has the most successful depiction of African tribal life, about which Rattray himself says, within quote, "The story has been written as a novel, but the main facts and also most of the dialogue are as I heard them from my native friends. I have endeavored to make my characters speak, act, and react as unsophisticated Africans would. Of what is about to be recorded, some part might possibly be classified as anthropology. Although I hasten to disclaim any such dull intention, I have hopes that the tale may serve a purpose." So he's telling that this is a true novel, but yet it relies heavily on anthropology. Just like Nagini Konna, this novel is also based on a myth of the leopard clan of the Ashanti tribe of Ghana, whose totem was a talking leopard called Kurutwa Mansa. The story centers around the forbidden love of two members of this leopard clan, Opoku, the male, a young hunter, and Amlagane, the adolescent priestess, who is the keeper of the arrow poison, which proves that the clan also had authority of women, just like it was in the Nagini Konna story. Now, as per the clan doctrine, a priestess has to remain chaste. That means she has to maintain a vow of chastity until a certain age and cannot ever marry anyone from the leopard clan. Although there was no consanguinity, but as per the existing law of the clan, therefore, Opoku and Amlagane were considered as siblings. But as we all know, love really doesn't adhere to any boundary, and very soon, Opoku and Amlagane got into a relation, which therefore was incestuous as per the clan doctrine. So, after their physical intimacy, Opoku was more traditional between the two. He became worried about Amlagane's violation of her vow of chastity because he feared that this will soon be discovered during the performance of a rite called the female circumcision. He feared that their transgression would cause the infertility of the land, bring doom to the clan, and bring impotence to the arrow poison of which Amlagane was the keeper. While the conflict was going on in the meantime, the clan elders resolved to let the execution ceremony happen to justify or to dispel their fears about Amlagane. In a desperate bid, Opoku bribed the cutter so that he declares Amlagane as a virgin. And he then goes to hunt a deadly elephant carrying Amlagane's arrow poison with the hope that he can return with the dead beast's tusks, and thus he can prove that Amlagane's virginity was intact. Hence, the arrow poison has also not lost its power, and the clan will be spared from the divine wrath. This shows his extent of love for Amlagane, how much he tried to protect his beloved. But unfortunately, he fails to return as he lost his way in the wilderness and was attacked by a mad elephant. Meanwhile, after the accession ceremony was done, Amlagane was exposed and then she was dethroned, and she had to marry a member of the nearby Porcupine clan. At that point of time, she was pregnant with Opoku's child. She gave birth to the child as per the law as her husband's heir. This was the time when finally Opoku returns. When he finds that Amlagane is not his anymore and she is married off, he fervently begs her to leave her husband and flee with him, but Amlagane could not accept the offer. She had already been disgraced. She couldn't afford the second disgrace. Time goes on, and very, very soon she was bitten and killed by a black mamba. It was as if a divine wrath which killed her for her transgression. Devastated Opoku carried her corpse into the forest and puts it in a grove around a magic tree with a silver trunk, which was emanating a smokeless fire that had converted the tree into a burning pole with a hollow on the top. Opoku then confessed his sin to his father that yes, he had lied, both of them had disgraced, and what they have done has definitely disgraced the entire clan. And after that, he had thrust the poisonous arrow into his thigh. At that point, a fire lit up which consumed the grove along with the dead lovers inside. Just at the moment the magic tree was crashing down, the people around saw a pair of leopards, one male and one female, emerge from the flames and vanished into the forest. Once the fire extinguished, no trace of bodily remains of Opoku and Amlagane could be found. But after a few days, the locals saw a leopard couple loitering near the river. That was the point when the leopard clan believed that these sinners, that is Amlagane and Opoku, who had broken immemorially established taboos and faced the dark nemesis, have finally achieved atonement through painful death. Hence, the gods and the forefathers of the leopard clan had pardoned them. So they also left the leopard couples alone and loved them from a distance and believed that finally love has won. Now, having placed both the narratives in front of you, the almost true 1934 African story, and the 1952 Bengali fiction, a question now arises. Did Tarashankar read Rattray's novel? Well, there is no evidence. But what makes these two novels compare worthy? Because one is written in English in a background of African tribal life, and another is written in the Indian background, that is typically in a Bengali background of the Sundarban area. Maybe we can look into the commonness and try to read parallelly between the two texts. Both the texts have women, rather young women, as central characters who have divine power and control over clan. Shabala, Pingala, Amlagani. Both the stories have tribal background where cult, superstitions, beliefs, taboos, and totems acted as guiding forces of the narrative. The Bish Bebe and their snake totem, the leopard clan and their talking leopard totem, and the superstitions and the taboo attached with both the stories remain same. Both these stories are actually stories of prohibited love that ended in tragedy as punishment for the sin of the breaking taboo. You know, Pingola died, so did Amlagani. And very interestingly, both stories have relied on myths. Of course, more in Bandopadhyay, where he had used Shiv Manasha Chand myth, Krishna Kaliyo myth, and Rattray has used an Ashanti myth of the leopard clan. Now, on this note, we can now have a final assessment of how literature from two corners of the world, having different language, different milieu, different perspective, speak similarly about the boundary of religion, about unbound love and their inevitable conflict, about how religion plays the villain in form of a male when the protagonist is essentially a female. So both the stories does not only narrate tales of tribal lives or tribal clans, but also highlights the never-ending gender tussle in positions of authority and disbursement of power in society, where women become victims mostly. But the most intriguing similarity that I found is that a British anthropologist and an offspring of a decadent Bengali feudal system, that is Rattray and Tarashankar respectively, both in spite of having their privileged socioeconomic stature, chose to illustrate life of the, within quotation, others, the mistreated ones, and both have heavily advocated for love over religious dicta, thus speaking an universal truth in different languages. I've come to the final stage where I will conclude my deliberation by saying that I feel Tarashankar had probably scored a little more than Captain Rattray, because the Leopard Priestess ends on a supernatural and mysterious mythical note which is devoid of reality. But Tarashankar, at the end of his novel, not only brought back Shabala, the first Nagini Konna who had fled away after killing Shirobede Mahadev, but he also showed that defying all superstitions, she had married a Muslim boy because that boy had helped her believe that a woman can never be a Nagini. The quote it goes like this: Nari Nagini hoy na. Thus, in Tarashankar's story, mortal reality wins over taboo, blind faith, and religious barrier, championing the precious human emotion called love. Priestly penance has taken the backseat here. And it is very, very interesting that one written in 1934 and another written in 1952, one written in Africa, another written in Bengal, could speak of the same situation, could speak of the same context, apparently having no connection between themselves. Because, as I said, there is no proof, there is no document which shows that Tarashankar had actually read Rattray. I had been very lucky to read Rattray's book, which is not available anywhere now, from my deceased grandfather's personal library. And later on, when I read Tarashankar's Nagini Konnar Kahini, I was extremely intrigued to find the similarity and how it speaks of the universal human emotion of love and how it challenges religion and how it challenges a woman's position in an authoritative context. So I found that while we're talking about the comparative world literatures, these two can be taken as a case study of how literature from different corners of the world can be read parallelly, can be analyzed parallelly, and can have a broader milieu or a broader impact on literature study. Thank you very much for having me and for your patient hearing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I now request Honorable Vice-Chancellor Professor Nandini Sahu, ma'am, to kindly share her valuable remarks. Ma'am, please.
Okay, am I audible and visible, Paramita?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I was keenly listening to both the speakers, and yes, they talk sense and serious research indeed. Both of them have been very deeply engaged with their own kind of research, and they have certainly contributed to enriching this particular lecture series on comparative literature. The first speaker, Shantanu Majee, who happens to be one of the very well-known scholars in West Bengal and outside, he talked about some important issues vis-a-vis colonial classroom English studies in India. He gave examples from various English literary texts, mostly from the Victorian age, and he emphasized the colonial epistemic inheritance, where English studies in India emerges as an apparatus of colonial knowledge production. It shapes our curriculum, it shapes our canons, and then he gave references to the epistemology and the civilizational hierarchies in English literature, uh, which has got into our classrooms in the form of syllabus, and then how to go about it, how to challenge those things, how to neutralize, and then create a more inclusive environment in our English studies classroom was something that he emphasized, which is very, very important. When we design our MA English syllabus, now we are in the process of preparing 3 more MA programs, Dr. Shantanu, for your information. We have MA in Translation Studies, we have MA in Hindi, History, and Political Science, and now we are preparing 3 more MA programs: MA English, MA Gender Studies, and MA Comparative World Literatures. These 3 we are preparing. So when we design our final syllabus, I'll certainly get in touch with both of you to help us out with our syllabus design, to recommend interesting and important texts for that matter. And then Dr. Shantanu also talked about canon as an ideological technology. That was pretty interesting for me. The discipline that is institutionalized as English literary canon as a regulatory mechanism, marginalizing the indigenous literatures and producing epistemic asymmetry in the classrooms, was something that was hinted at. And I think you are very right there when you want that English classrooms should be more flexible and more inclusive, and they get into world literatures rather than probably only British or Victorian literature. That's what was my takeaway. And then somehow you mentioned the post-colonial disciplinary anxiety in the English studies classrooms. And then the pedagogy of translation and their absences was something that I got from your discourse. We should have more literary texts from India and otherwise, maybe from South Asia, from Africa, Australia, and many other places. We may get those translated to English, or we may get the translated versions and put them in our MA English or English Studies classroom. That's what you pointed out. And because the classroom is also a site of understanding and resistance. Resistance, when I say that, I mean resistance of anything and everything that is not inclusive. So you pointed out that English classrooms should have those kinds of resistance where they get into world literatures through the comparative pedagogy. Your lecture was pretty interesting. As a person of English literature, I thoroughly enjoyed that. And thank you and many congratulations, Dr. Shantanu. The second speaker, Chandramalli Sengupta, in the beginning itself, I told that my research resonance with her. Dr. Chandramalli, you would be glad to know that the country's first MA in folk literature with 20,000 pages of study material is designed by me. You can just Google MAFCS, MA in Folklore and Culture Studies. So 20,000 pages open access material on folk literature, folk literary texts. Most of the texts that you were mentioning here during your lecture have been taken in that MA in folk literature program. You will be very glad to have a look at those. And the program is taken very well by Indian Academia. 18,000 students are enrolled for that program. And also we have introduced a UGC NET examination. Earlier, folk literature used to be a part of our MA English or some other languages. Just one or two questions from folk literature used to be there in the UGC NET. But now, NET examination 71, number 71 is folk literature, which we have introduced, and it is a complete and a dedicated NET examination on folk literature. But when I said that, I also put a point with a word of caution to the students of folk literature that they should think about the placement scenario vis-a-vis folk literature. Whenever any university thinks about introducing MA in folk literature, should sign some memoranda of understanding, MOUs. As an administrator, I think now I'm in a position to initiate MOUs. As faculty members, I would recommend all of you that whenever you propose anything vis-a-vis folk literature, initiate some institutions and MOUs and submit those to the administrators of your university, so that the students who pass out from those folk literature programs and then they do the UGC NET examination, they are in a better position vis-a-vis placements. That is also a very humble suggestion. Having said that, let me come back to your areas of research in pedagogy. You specialize in folk literature and mythology. Again, mythology is something that resonates with my thinking. I have poetry collections like Sita and Medusa and Karna, and now I am writing a poetry book on Draupadi and one on Urmila. So I have been writing a lot on Indian English literature with reference to mythology, then Jagannath culture, some food culture in Jagannath studies, food culture in Jagannath literature. Those things are my areas of interest. So something that you spoke about was very, very interesting for me. And from your lecture, my takeaways were very meaningful. I have jotted down. The first thing that I thought you were hinting at was the gendered sacred authority of the female priesthood that destabilizes the patriarchal theology. It interrogates the masculinization of the rural and the ritual power across the religious traditions. That is one important point that I took from your, sensibilities, your discourses. And then somewhere you mentioned about the comparative post-colonial feminism. The African-Indian comparative lens was something that is interesting here. Then you mentioned about body as a ritual text. Look at the poetry of many Indian English writers today. For example, look at poet Jayant Mahapatra. Many people are doing researches on the poetry of Jayant Mahapatra vis-a-vis corporeality and body politics. He talks about the Konark temple and the idols thereof and their body, and then he takes those to the discourses of body politics. So I thought your research can very well fit into those kinds of examples and texts. And then somewhere you mentioned about myth, fiction, and re-sacratization, if that word can be used in literature classrooms. You talked about the mythic structures, the rewriting of many mythical texts. Many writers are now rewriting mythology. I'm not a big fan of rewriting mythology. I think if we really want to take one mythical character, say for example Sita or Draupadi or somebody, we have to contextualize Draupadi and Sita, and we have to put them vis-a-vis modern requirements, sensibilities, how modern women or even men or the third gender for that matter, how they can get benefits and they can get inspirations and ideas from those mythical characters. So the mythical characters may have to be taken into consideration by deconstruction and then reconstruction of those characters. If I tell and retell stories from mythology now in my Indian classrooms, English classrooms especially, I don't think that I'm going to make much of sense. But if I take some mythical characters who are of seminal interest to the whole world, and then I place them by contemporaneizing them, by deconstructing them, that would be very interesting and important for our students. I took that from your lecture. And somewhere you mentioned about the narrative as ethical intervention. Then you talked about literary representations that function pedagogically to challenge the exclusion religious traditions. So how exclusionist, if I can use the word, so how we have been excluding many texts and many writers and many discourses in our discourses of mythology and folklore, and we take only things of our convenience and our understanding. Probably you hinted at that. Moreover, your lecture was very inclusive. You discussed very many texts, and when we are going to design our syllabus of gender studies, and after that, I will also propose MA in folk literature. We usually use three languages in our university: Hindi and English and Bangla. We will take texts from pan-Indian texts, literatures, and this is where we will seek your help and support. Thank you very much for contributing to Hindi University Special Lecture Series on Comparative World Literatures. Many congratulations to both of you. Your lectures are going to stay with us in our YouTube channel, and they will be available to the audiences maybe within a day or two. Now I leave it to Dr. Paramita to take some questions, if any, or to conclude the session. Many thanks.
Thank you, ma'am. I will request our participants, if there is any questions, you please feel free to ask.
Thank you very much for having me. It has been a very interesting discourse from Dr. Shantanu Majee as well as from Dr. Sengupta. I am a second generation diasporic researcher. And I think that we can decolonize, but up to a certain degree, because history is continuous. The other point I would like to bring is the contextualization. This also has to be taken into account. As colonized people, I was lucky to be born under colonized Mauritius, but I visit India regularly and I'm very close to India. I think that we have to take into consideration history. We react to it, that's definitely. But at the same time, history is there. It is part of us. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your contribution and your suggestions. And yes, sir. Yes, Shantanu, sir, please.
Yes, I'm so glad that Dr. Srishila Gopal had all the time to sit through our lectures. She's also a very important part of our ICLACS group, this group of scholars. We tend to work on Commonwealth literature series. And Dr. Sahu, I think it's a rare privilege to sit through your critical response, because I had been thinking that how relevant it is for comparative world literature to emphasize on institutions too, to try and open up our archives and modes of knowledge production. The fact that, which was, I believe, evident from our discussion today, that world literature is no longer confined to textual comparison in our classrooms. We are now studying syllabi, we are studying university curriculum, we're looking at publishing networks, digitizing projects like you. You talked about open access initiatives. That means a world to us. No other engagement has possibly contributed to this idea of transnational infrastructures of access as open access initiatives have. I'm more than glad to know that you have been one of the primary movers and shakers in contributing to something that is so elementary to the spirit of comparative world literature. And I believe as comparative world literature has moved into the digital age now, archives from the global south can also intervene with inherited canons and global readerships through that way. So thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And as we come to the close of this enriching session, I extend my sincere gratitude to our Honorable Vice-Chancellor, Professor Nandini SAHU ma'am. I sincerely thank our esteemed speakers and all participants for their thoughtful engagement and valuable contributions. Today's deliberations have truly reflected the spirit of comparative world literatures by fostering dialogues across cultures and perspectives. I would also like to acknowledge the dedicated efforts of our technical team, Kajori Das Roy and Aman Singh, whose seamless support ensured the smooth conduct of this program. My heartfelt thanks to Hindi University, West Bengal, for its continued encouragement in organizing such intellectually stimulating events. With this, we conclude today's session. Thank you all and have a very good day. Namaskar.